In 1930, the Republican-controlled House of Representatives, in an effort to alleviate the effects of the the Great Depression, passed the the Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act, which raised or lowered raised tariffs in an effort to collect more revenue for the federal government. Did it work? Anyone know the effects? It did not work, and the United States sank deeper into the Great Depression.
That, of course, is from Ferris Bueller's Day Off, classic movie, where a history teacher drones on about tariffs while his students sit in complete boredom. It's kind of like when I stop by Keltner's class sometimes, you know.
Wow, zing.
Oh, sick burn.
Pow.
Pretty good. I've been thinking about that one for quite a while. Tariffs are often treated as the dullest of economic policies. They're just these taxes on imports, right? But in reality, they've shaped wars, ignited political crises, and defined American economic strategy.
Yes, that's right, Dr. Garrison. And tariffs have been central to U.S. history, and some of the fiercest debates in our country have been over tariffs. Starting back in the 1780s and 1790s with Alexander Hamilton's grand vision of American industry to, of course, the nullification crisis that nearly led to a civil war before the actual Civil War. And now today, even modern trade wars with countries like China, tariffs have been anything but boring.
That's right. So today we're unpacking the history of tariffs, what they are, how they've shaped the U.S., and why they continue to be a hot topic in both history and modern politics.
Okay, so first things first. What exactly is a tariff? When I say tear, you say if. Tear.
If.
Tear.
If.
Nice. So at its core, a tariff is a tax on imported goods. But the question is, why would the federal government tax imports? Well, our federal government uses tariffs for two main reasons. The first reason is to create revenue. That's called a revenue tariff. So before income taxes, Progressive era shout out.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, that's right.
We did not have a great way of raising national revenue. And so revenue tariffs were the way to do that, to fund the national government. So this started all the way back in 1789. This was actually the first piece of legislation passed by the new Congress under the new Constitution. And it was signed into law by George Washington. And it taxed things like glass and pottery. And so it's just used primarily to raise revenue for the U.S. government. The other type of tariff is called a protective tariff. And these are designed to shield domestic industries from foreign competition. And so it's designed to make imported goods more expensive so that the American-made goods are more affordable.
Right. So let's suppose you're a farmer. It's the early 1800s. You're making some wool, right? And suddenly, these British wool floods the market. And the British wool, it's like all fancy and British. You know how the British make their wool.
Everything's
Hill,
fancy.
Do something British.
That was, yes, of course.
Wow, that was, yeah.
Yes, we have fine wool. Yes, of course.
Yeah, you get somebody like that coming in with their fancy wool, and it floods the market, right? And it's cheaper than what you can produce as an American wool maker person. So a protective tariff would impose a tax on imported British wool to make it more expensive, and this would make American wool the cheaper option, encouraging consumers to buy domestic products instead of those fancy British products. And USA, right? That's what we're after.
USA.
America. And the sound of a screeching eagle. So, there you go.
Sorry, no, that was just like a cat with its tail caught under a rocking chair or something. I'm sorry about that.
That was the great American eagle. So tariffs, these protective tariffs, they sound good for American manufacturers, but not everyone wins under a tariff, unfortunately. So, for instance, if you are a southern cotton planter back in the 1780s, 1790s, into the 1800s, those tariffs could actually hurt you because the South relied so heavily on exporting cotton to Britain. So when you're exporting your cotton, you are importing British manufactured goods. So when the U.S. placed these tariffs on British imports, Britain would often retaliate by placing tariffs on American exports, which made them more expensive for British manufacturers to buy American cotton. So that meant that Southern planters faced declining demand for cotton while still paying higher prices for those British manufactured goods.
And it's that tension between protecting American industry and keeping global trade flowing. That's exactly what we're talking about today. And it continues to make tariffs so politically explosive. One of the earliest and strongest advocates for tariffs was, of course, the famous Alexander Hamilton. He believed that in order to build a strong nation, the United States needed more than just farming or agriculture. It needed manufacturing and industry. So I'll tell you what, let's just let the man speak for himself.
Alexander Hamilton. My name is Alexander Hamilton.
All right, that's
and
enough. That's enough. Nothing annoys me like someone writing a musical and saying, and who should play the star? Me. That's Lin-Manuel Miranda.
Yeah, why didn't they consider Mr. Hill?
But that's kind of like us, I guess, starting a podcast and saying, who should be the stars of it? Us.
Yeah, but the people wanted this. We're just giving the
so
people what
many
they
people
wanted.
have wanted this for so long, and yeah, we haven't even been able to go to the grocery store.
I know.
Because of the fame from the podcast.
Please, you
had
guys,
to
listeners, we
sacrifice.
love you, but we need some private time sometimes.
So yeah, we're on the same page now, at the same level as Lin-Manuel Miranda. Okay, back to Alexander Hamilton.
Hamilton, not in a Lin-Manuel voice or Mr. Hill voice for that matter, but in a Hamilton voice. To secure to every nation the means of supplying itself without dependence on others is a measure dictated by the soundest policy. The expediency of encouraging manufacturers in the United States, which was not long since deemed very questionable, appears at this time to be pretty generally admitted. The embarrassments which have obstructed the progress of our external trade have led to serious reflections on the necessity of enlarging the sphere of our domestic commerce. To effect this, it is necessary to promote such manufactures as will tend to render the United States independent on foreign nations for military and other essential supplies.
That's right. In his 1791 report on manufactures, Hamilton argued that a strong federal government should actively protect and nurture American industry. And I think Hamilton gets his way just because he talks so much that everybody's just like, okay, fine, whatever.
You think that's what it was?
We'll go ahead. Yeah, I
was
mean, that
quite
quote, I
verbose.
think, is a great example of that. Everybody's just like, oh, here goes Alex again.
He was a pretty smart guy. And
He
you know
was.
what? He was pretty easy on the eyes, is
Really?
what I understand.
Is that right?
That's what they always say. They always say, like, hey, Hamilton, man, the guy's got the looks to go with it. So
I
kind of
thought
like
they
Mr.
said
Hill.
that more about George Washington.
No, they just
He was just the tallest
he was
guy
just
in the
taller,
room.
And he never
was just
smiled
taller.
because of his teeth.
Yeah, nasty.
Yeah.
He had like hippo bone. You know,
Yeah.
would you smile if you had the hippo bone sticking out of your
I
mouth?
think he had some human teeth also.
Oh, there you go.
Okay, so Alexander Hamilton, back to him, he wanted high tariffs on imported goods so that new American manufacturing could develop without being crushed by foreign competition. And this was really important for a new nation to put its foothold kind of on the global economic stage. And so he, in this report that we just heard from him directly, advocated for government intervention such as tariffs, also subsidies for American producers, and infrastructure investment to help American manufacturers both compete and grow in not just the short term, but the long term.
This was part of the Federalist vision. You had Hamilton and his allies, like John Adams, who believed in a strong central government that could steer economic policy. In contrast, you've got Thomas Jefferson and his Democratic Republican allies who saw tariffs as a threat to the agrarian economy. And Jefferson believed that America's strength lay in its farmers and that economic independence came from agriculture, not industry. And he feared that high tariffs would benefit northern manufacturers at the expense of southern and western farmers, making them dependent on government intervention. and industrial elites. So ultimately, Jefferson's argument is tariffs are the tool of big government.
Okay, so let's jump ahead to 1828. We all know the tariff, right, audience? Everybody knows the 1828 tariff.
Of course.
But I'll say it anyway. The tariff of abominations. And just from the
Dun,
name
dun,
alone,
dun.
yes, you can probably take a guess at how much some people hated it.
We, the people of South Carolina, are determined to maintain this. Our ordinance and declaration at every hazard do further declare that we will not submit to the application of force on the part of the federal government to reduce this state to obedience, but that we will consider the passage by Congress of any act to coerce the state as inconsistent with the longer continuance of South Carolina in the Union. To which President Andrew Jackson responded, "I'll hang the first man I get my hands on to the first tree I can find."
Wow, that's very violent. But that's Andrew Jackson. Right?
Yeah.
They
Andrew
said
Jackson.
Andrew Jackson, when he walked, it was said that he would rattle because he had so many bullets at him from all the duels that he fought.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, he was a powerfully violent man.
He was.
But he got things done, and the town of Jackson, Missouri is named after him.
Oh,
And
here we go. Is that the first Jackson reference you've made on the podcast
first,
so far?
The first of many.
The first of so many. Nobody loves their
You've
hometown
really held back.
Yeah,
like
I-
Dr. Garrison, which
Just
is great.
When it's appropriate, I make sure everybody knows. Okay, this tariff of abominations, right? The tariff that caused the President of the United States to threaten to hang people from trees. This tariff raised duties on raw materials, manufactured goods, and protected northern industry from European competition. But it severely harmed the South. Southern planters depended on selling cotton to Britain, but the tariff made British goods more expensive in the United States, and this reduced British demand for American cotton. At the same time, the South relied on imported goods, and now those imports were more expensive as well. So okay, I'm seeing a pattern here involving cotton, the South, tariffs. It's almost as if this battle over tariffs might lead to uncivil consequences.
What?
See, there you go again, jumping to the conclusions.
I'm just
Hindsight
excited.
is 2020.
Just excited.
We'll get there. So even continuing this rage against the tariff of abominations, actually at the charge of this was Vice President John C. Calhoun of South Carolina. And he argued not just that states shouldn't have to follow this particular tariff, but he went a step further and said that states had the right to nullify federal laws they deemed unconstitutional, which was kind of crazy.
Right. I mean, you've got the vice president telling the president to basically go nullify himself, right?
And
Ooh, that's a good comeback. Go nullify yourself.
Yeah. What if our students start using that?
oh my gosh.
Well, I mean, I would respect that.
You know what? Come Monday, whenever this episode drops, I'm going to count the students
Yeah.
who I'm going to give them the directive, and they're going to say back to me, you know what? You can take this test, Mr. Hill, and go nullify yourself.
Yeah. And I'd have to be like, tip my hat to you.
And I'm just like, okay, no test for you, buddy.
So this states' rights argument, that essentially is what Calhoun is making, is going to lead to what's called the nullification crisis, which is actually a lot more exciting than it sounds.
Yes, and chronology.
Matters.
Okay, so this is around 1832, 1833, at the end of Jackson's first term.
When South Carolina outright refused to enforce the tariff, they were essentially threatening secession, to secede as a state from the Union. And President Andrew Jackson, never one to back down, as a quote we heard earlier would imply, responded forcefully. He declared nullification illegal and even prepared to use military force.
To which then, of course, the great compromiser, we all know him, we all love him, Mr. Henry Clay from the great state of Kentucky. He comes in and he puts his hands up and says, whoa, 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 we've got to end this crisis.
That's exactly what he did.
Yes, his words exactly. And so he proposed legislation that would gradually lower the tariff. And so that's great for the time being, but I mean, even though we say history, hindsight is 2020, it does reveal and sort of expose these deep regional divides between in the North and the South, but also between federal and state power. Fast forward to the 20th century.
What an
That's
effect.
You like
Wait,
that?
is
What a
that a
great
fast
sound
forward
effect.
noise? I had no idea.
Who needs to pay for, fancy digital effects
Yeah,
when we have
I can just
the
do it
real
myself.
thing?
Yes. So fast forward to the 20th century, because chronology.
Matters.
Yes, the Great Depression begins in 1929, and in response, Congress is going to pass the Smoot-Hawley Tariff of 1930, and this is one of the most infamous tariffs in American history.
Right. And you have to remember that the country is reeling from this financial collapse. And so the goal was really to try to protect American farmers, American businesses, and you would do this theoretically by raising tariffs on over 20,000 imported goods. The result, pretty much a complete disaster. Other countries are going to immediately retaliate, imposing their own tariffs on American exports. U.S. trade plummeted. U.S. exports dropped over 60%. The global economy worsened, and by 1931, international trade had shrunk by 1/3, leading to widespread unemployment, economic instability in many countries. Germany, for instance, saw its industrial production collapse, which is going to open the door to extremist political movements. And I'm not going to say anything else here, but I think you can see where that's going. So not good.
Yeah, I don't feel very protected
No,
by
Not at
Smoot-Hawley.
quite the opposite.
Way to go, tariffs.
Yeah, and historians widely agree, for all the reasons mentioned above, that Smoot-Hawley actually made the Depression worse, proving that tariffs aren't always the solution to economic problems.
After World War II, tariffs took a back seat as the United States pushed for global free trade. But in 1987, Ronald Reagan imposed a 100% tariff on Japanese electronics and automobiles to protect American manufacturing, to address concerns over Japan's trade practices.
Right. And yet, in his radio address on free and fair trade delivered 2 years earlier on September 7th, 1985, did you guys know that when I graduated from high school?
Oh, that was
1985?
That was
Is
the
that
year I
right?
was born.
Oh, geez. Okay.
I-
Oh, boy.
Was not yet alive. Sorry, Mr. Hill.
Whew. Okay, to borrow from Ms. Keltner, diddle-a-doodle-a-doodle-a, fast forward. Reagan discussed in that 1985 address, he discussed his decision not to impose quotas or tariffs on footwear imports. He emphasized that protectionist measures, such as tariffs, could lead to higher costs for consumers. We're kind of hearing some backlash about that now. Harm the overall economy and result in job losses. Instead, he advocated for opening markets abroad to create American jobs by increasing exports. Here's the Gipper himself explaining his position. Well, it's sometimes said that if you put 3 economists together in a room and ask them a question, you're liable to get more than 3 answers. It's true, economists don't often agree. But there is one issue on which almost all responsible economists, whatever their political persuasion, are unanimous. They agree that free and fair trade brings growth and opportunity and creates jobs. And they all warn that high trade barriers, what is often called protectionism, undermines economic growth and destroys jobs. I don't call it protectionism. I call it destructionism.
Where is he? Oh my gosh. Ronnie, are you here with us now?
You bet yourself.
Where's Nancy?
Yes.
She can't be far behind.
Where is Nancy?
Probably
I don't
looking to the
know.
stars.
I don't know if I have socks on. I don't know what I had for breakfast this morning, but
Well, thank you, Mr. Reagan, President Reagan. So with Reagan's presidency, we can see both the rejection of tariffs, but also the strategic use of them when he deemed it necessary. So on the one hand, he championed free trade, warning against protectionism's negative consequences and hoping to build up free trade. But on the other hand, he was willing to take very strong actions like the 100% tariff on Japanese electronics to counter what his administration saw as unfair trade practices from Japan.
exactly. And that reflects a broader theme in U.S. trade policy, balancing that free market idealism with the need to protect domestic industries. As Reagan himself warned, we must resist protectionism because it can only lead to fewer jobs for them and fewer jobs for us. Either free world countries go forward and sustain the drive toward more open markets, or they risk sliding back toward the mistakes of the 1930s and succumbing to the evils of more and more government intervention. And this is really no choice at all.
I believe Reagan there is referencing Smoot-Hawley, which is just more evidence that the past is always with us.
Nerd alert. Anytime you can mention Smoot-Hawley, you're all over it. What's it with you and Smoot?
I just think it's great, and it really, helps me feel
Well, you know who didn't think
alive.
it was great? People living in the Great Depression.
True.
So then, after Reagan's presidency in the 1990s and early 2000s, free trade agreements like NAFTA, which was passed in 1994, reduced tariffs between the U.S., Canada, and Mexico. And the goal here was to promote economic interdependence and globalization, in particular between those three countries.
NAFTA means jobs, American jobs, and good-paying American jobs. If I didn't believe that, I wouldn't support this agreement.
Bill?
Oh my gosh, is Bill here?
That's right, and I did not have
No.
relations with that woman.
No, we stop there. We could stop there, and let's get back to Mr. Hill.
This is a family show.
Let's get back to Mr.
I said
Hill.
relations.
Let's
Okay.
get back. Where's Hill at?
All right.
Bring him in.
Oh, here he is. Hey, come on in, everybody. All right. Clinton championed NAFTA as a way to expand trade, create jobs, and boost economic growth, despite concerns from critics who fear job losses due to outsourcing. His administration framed the agreement as a key step toward modernizing the U.S. economy in an increasingly globalized world. Maybe,
Just a quick editing note, a little look behind the scenes here. Mr. Hill had a little note to himself to talk about his memories of the 90s, and just didn't go the way we had expected. But we're going to keep it in there because this is a real show with real people.
So, yeah, he started to read the note about him needing to talk about his own memory of NAFTA, and he tried to play it off like he wasn't doing that, and then we could all see the script and him at the same time. And
truth be told, I have no memory of the 90s.
Yeah,
so,
but, I mean,
me either, really.
90s.
Well,
was
yeah,
awesome.
because
An
you're a
infant.
baby, and okay.
And you're old!
And you're old. I remember NAFTA.
A man of a certain age.
We're going to leave the 90s and instead get to the 2010s because that's when tariffs make a comeback. The Trump administration imposed tariffs on steel, aluminum, and goods from China, arguing that the U.S. was getting unfair trade deals and something had to be done about it.
So why is there still a debate over tariffs? I mean, just last week, new tariffs were announced by the federal government. There was a 25% tariff announced for both Canada and Mexico, which there's already been a 30-day pause on that if Canada and Mexico agree to strengthen their border security with the United States. And then there's also been a 10% tariff put in place on China, which has gone into effect. So this is nothing new. This is why we look back at history to sort of understand these things. But the debate is still really over the fact that supporters argue that tariffs protect American jobs, American industries, and national security. But critics argue that tariffs increase consumer prices and hurt international relations.
Right. So the big question is how tariffs affect the economy long term. Do they bring back American manufacturing, or do they spark trade wars that hurt businesses and consumers?
And either way, as we've seen, from 1789 to 1832 to 1930 to the 1980s to 2025, tariffs remain one of the longest running debates in American history.
As we begin to wrap up, we would like to thank our sponsors.
First up, Junior Java, a student-led coffee and tea company with a mission to make education more equitable worldwide. Every purchase helps support kids in need. Fuel your studies and support a great cause. Check out juniorjavacoffee.com to shop and learn more.
Thanks, Junior Java, for keeping us and history brewing.
Hits every time. And also a big thanks to Cats of Family Dentistry, Scrawny Arms Farm, the Healthcare Group for Women, and Right on Ruben Schlansky College Essay Tutoring. As always, we are honored by their support.
Awesome. So what have we learned today? Maybe number one, tariffs have been a major part of American economic policy since the founding era. They've sparked some of the biggest conflicts in U.S. history, from the nullification crisis to Smoot-Hawley's role in the Great Depression. And even today, tariffs continue to shape economic and political debates.
And so for APUSH students, tariffs connect to federalism, sectionalism, economic crises, globalization, and government power, all major themes that you are sure to see on the AP test.
Thanks for tuning in to APUSH for All. If you like this episode, be sure to subscribe and leave us a review. Give a topic you want us to cover and send us a message to tell us all about it. You can follow us on Instagram at APUSH for All. You can find us on Spotify, Apple iTunes, and we are now even on YouTube.
Yes, and until next time, keep learning from yesterday to make sense of today.